Okay, I think we could start now. Good morning, everyone, and a very warm welcome from my side to the webinar Establishing a Company in Montenegro. My name is Anna Salihi. I am the Austrian Commercial Attaché in Belgrade, and I am also responsible for North Macedonia and Montenegro. I will be the one guiding you through today's session, and I am happy to have you interested in this today's topic. I'd like to also introduce you to my colleague Biljana Radonjic, who is the head office in Podgorica and our local expert there. And she will, of course, support you anytime, also after the webinar, of course, regarding any inquiries concerning the Montenegrin market.
Hello, everyone.
Before we start, I'd like to remind you that this webinar is being recorded and a video as well as the presentation of our guest speakers will be available to you afterwards. I kindly ask you to turn off both the microphone and the camera during the presentation. And if you have any questions in the meantime, you can send them into the group chat, but we will of course have a Q&A session afterwards where we'll have an interactive session. You can turn on the camera and the microphone and ask your questions directly. The focus of today's webinar is Montenegro as a business location and the legal and practical framework relevant for Austrian companies that consider entering the market or establishing a presence in any kind on the market. Montenegro has increasingly attracted attention as a destination for foreign investment. It's not only because of its geographical proximity to Austria, the strategic position in the Western Balkans, and the competitive tax environment, but also because the relatively straightforward company formation procedures make it an interesting option for market entry and project-based activities. At the same time, as probably many of you know, Montenegro is also one of the most advanced EU candidate countries in the region. It has opened all chapters in the EU accession negotiations, and nearly half of them were already closed. Actually, Montenegro is quite ambitious and tries to become the 28th member in 2028. These chapters also include key areas such as company law, the right of establishment and freedom to provide services, free movement of capital, as well as public procurement. As part of the EU accession process, Montenegrin legislation is continuously being aligned with the EU law. This gradual harmonization affects many areas that are highly relevant for businesses, including the corporate structures, regulatory compliance, procurement rules, and market access. However, EU alignment is still an ongoing process, and while the legal framework is increasingly approaching the EU standards, practical implementation and local specifics still require careful consideration. For companies operating across borders, this makes up-to-date legal knowledge and local expertise particularly important, especially when navigating procedures such as tenders, licensing, or establishing a local entity. This is exactly why and where our webinar comes in. The aim of the session is to provide you with practical insights, highlight typical challenges, and help you better understand the legal environment Austrian companies encounter when doing businesses in Montenegro. It is now my pleasure to introduce you to our speakers. First, we have Ms. Lana Vukmirovic-Misic. She's an attorney and senior partner at JPM Partners and Partners Law Office, where she advises international and domestic clients on corporate and cross-border legal matters. She has extensive hands-on experience supporting foreign companies in Montenegro and is closely familiar with the legal and regulatory challenges they face in practice. And then we have our second guest speaker, Ms. Diana Drljevic and she is a senior associate also at JPM and Partners in Montenegro with over 5 years of experience advising clients on corporate and commercial matters. So our two experts will share their expertise now with practical perspectives, and I want to express my deepest gratitude for joining us for today's webinar, and thank you very much. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Anna, and thank you, Biljana, for both the opportunity and for this great initiative. I'm looking forward to reconnecting with you and discussing in a Q&A session afterwards. Just a short, I think that Anna provided already quite a good introductory. Just shortly, we are coming from JPM Partners. That's a law firm, service law firm, which does the business in Montenegro, in Serbia, in North Macedonia, in Bosnia and Herzegovina. Anna already introduced us. Just worth mentioning, I'm also a designated lawyer of the Austrian Embassy since 2013, working in the corporate commercial sector for almost 20 years, mostly mergers and acquisition, corporate commercial, but half of my work comes from construction and real estate development projects, including the local construction contract, but also international construction contracts and disputes sometimes which arise from those contracts. Together with me today is our senior associate, Diana Delivic. She's usually a first point of contact when it comes to the inquiries from the foreign investors we receive when the discussion on setting up the company or choosing the corporate type of the structure, which is most suitable for a foreign investor, depending on the subject matter. Our office also has a German-speaking desk, which means that we have lawyers who speak German, but also the lawyers who are educated in Germany. We are very proud of having quite a number of the clients coming from the German-speaking markets, such as Austria, Germany, and Switzerland. The firm is very well recognized in the Balkans. It's recognized by all the leading ranking agencies. I will guide you today through a few points, not just discussion on the corporate structure, but also brief you a bit on the factors for doing business in Montenegro, on some of the most important bilateral treaties which Montenegro has with the Republic of Austria, with a foreign investment regime, and then Diana will guide you to the type of vehicles, legal forms for setting up a business, for the and general tax regime and tax benefits in Montenegro. So Anna already mentioned some of the key factors for choosing Montenegro for doing business is the stable geopolitical position. Montenegro is a NATO member. It's also one of the fastest countries in the region, or most advanced one when it comes to the EU accession. I always put a kind of a disclaimer here because this is a political process and we never know what will come out of the politicians. But currently, at the moment, it's a very ambitious to get to the EU membership as a 28 country member. It has a high level of alignment with the EU regulations. There is a very heavy ongoing harmonization with the EU acquis. We are having, on a daily basis, very heavy amendments of the laws. Most of those are really harmonized with the acquis, but it's an ongoing process which is very intensified in the last 2 years. It's a euro-based economy. It's a very interesting story how we use euro. It comes from the former Yugoslavia period when we switched to the Deutschmark. And then after, when the Germany started using euro, we transferred to the euro. But it's very important for the foreign investor because it eliminates the currency risk and ensures the monetary stability. We are also, from last year, we became a SEPA member, so it means that we are a member of the Single European Payment System. We have been looking forward to this membership a lot because it provides a very low-cost cross-border euro transactions. So nowadays, it's even for us cheaper to transfer the money to Austria than sometimes between the Montenegrin banks. But hope that is something that will be changed as well. It has an open and service-oriented economy. Very strong sectors are tourism, energy, infrastructure, and real estate. It has a competitive cost environment, so we have a lower labor cost compared to the EU markets, which with the accession of the EU or approaching of the accession is changing, but still comparing to the EU market, the labor costs are at a lower level. It has a growing infrastructure and connectivity, which I think that probably is one of the most interesting points for you. There is a lot of infrastructure investments at the moment, both in the road construction, energy, and then digital networks. So I'll guide you briefly through the foreign investment regime we have. Montenegro is one of the most liberal foreign investment countries. This means that foreign investors are completely free to set up a company. The companies which are set up in Montenegro, regardless of the ownership, are treated as national companies. There are no industry restrictions, for example, telecom, transports, ports. So foreign investments are allowed in all the industry sectors. There is no control over the foreign investments, with the exception of the certain, let's say, sensitive industries, for example, such as military. Otherwise, the foreign investors are having the complete national treatment. Foreigners can own real estate, with the exception of some large agriculture and forestry land. But regardless of these, Montenegrin companies are treated as a national, with a national treatment. So if you are doing a real estate development, for example, and you have an agricultural project, you can set up a company, and this company will have a national treatment. What is also very important, because the Montenegro doesn't have its own currency, it uses euro, so it's not very protective on the currency. So transfers of the money between Montenegro and the third country is completely liberated. You don't need the approvals of the National Bank, of the Central Bank of Montenegro. Central banks keeps the records, and you are notifying the Central Bank, because the Central Bank of Montenegro keeps the records for statistical purposes on the FDI structures, but there are no approval processes like in some other regional countries. When it comes to some of the most important bilateral treaties which we have with the Republic of Austria, I would mention, of course, double taxation treaty, which enables or eliminates double taxation with respect to the income and capital. Bilateral investment treaty, which provides you with arbitration mechanism for settlement of the disputes under the UNCITRAL Convention. Disputes can be brought before the International Center for Settlement of the Investment Disputes in Washington. This is a very, let's say, important treaty. Because in a recent few years back, between the European countries, those bilateral treaties have been nullified. And those treaties provide you the exemptions from the national courts. If you are dealing with a state or municipalities, then you can bring a dispute against the state under the arbitration mechanism. Also, one of the important treaties to mention is the social insurance treaty. This means that the employees who are working during their lifespan for a period of time in Austria and for a period of time in Montenegro can benefit from the pension, which is calculated based on the income from both countries. So social insurance is recognized. And also the Treaty on Legal Transactions, which provides the recognition of public documents and notarized private documents and judgment. This means that if you are having a public document which is issued in Austria or a judgment, then you can proceed without the apostille or legalization requirements for this document before using it in Montenegro. I also prepared a brief, let's say, a list of the industries which might be of the interest for Austrian companies in Montenegro, particularly having the heavy investments period in the infrastructure. So energy and infrastructure is very booming. Montenegro is rehabilitating their hydropower station, mainly the state-owned company EPCG. There is ongoing process of railway modernization, mostly funded by EU and through the EBRD and IFC projects. Renewable energy tenders, that's a very, Montenegro is producing most of its energy from the hydropower. and is exporting the energy at the moment during the winter time, importing it during the summertime because of the high tourist season. So a lot of solar projects, which are very good fit for hydro, are currently being developed. Wind farms as well, and we hope that those will be additioned with battery storage systems as well. There is currently major road infrastructure pipeline constructions, which is mostly run by the public company Monteput. We have constructed the first part of the highway. The second part of the highway, the tender has been closed recently. And there is an in-plan process for the third part of the highway for tendering, and plus 200 kilometers of the expressway. Some are being tendered at the moment, some are being in a planning status, but Monteput is a point of contact, or EBRD, IFC, KfW, depending on the type of the projects and whether those is run through the financing banks. In the process of alignment with EU, we are obliged to construct for all municipalities the wastewater treatment plant and water and sewage infrastructure. Some of those processes in some municipalities have been completed. Some municipalities are currently tendering or planning to tender for the wastewater treatment plants and sewage infrastructure. One of the hot topics at the moment when it comes to the energy is LNG and then the gas infrastructure as well. This is ongoing discussion on that, and as well the data center, which the state has published that it plans to construct and realize, most likely with the help of the foreign partner. Tourism and real estate have been the key sector for Montenegro for decades. I would say that according to the statistic, more than 50% of our total FDI comes from real estate investments. Those are mostly in the coastal resorts, mixed-use development, but also on the sustainable touristic projects on the north. There have been a growing demand for premium and sustainable tourism, and tourism dominates the economy definitely, with making 25 to 30% of the total GDP. What we also seen as a very interesting sector in the last couple of years is fintech and IT. Montenegro aligned its regulations with Second Payment Services Directive, which enables some of the IT companies to provide fintech solutions and payment services. This sector has been increased and is now between 5 and 10% of the total GDP. I will now hand you over to Diana, who will guide you through the type of legal forms which are suitable for setting up a business in Montenegro. And then at the end, I'm happy to answer all the questions in our Q&A. Diana, please go ahead.
Thank you, Lena. Hello, everyone from my side. I'll be very glad to introduce you and to present you some practical aspects of doing business in Montenegro, leaning to Lena's general position of Montenegro and the interest of potential investors. So one of the most important decisions the investors made when entering a new market is not operational, it's rather legal. The choice of legal form determines the level of risk, the government structure, and the ability to raise financial and very often the exit strategy. So in Montenegro, we have few forms of doing and performing business. On the next slide, I will talk more about limited liability company and joint stock company as two most often forms of doing business. And for now on, I will focus on the other forms. The first one would be the entrepreneurship, which is a form performed by a natural person who is engaged in economic activity and performs the activity on his own behalf and may employ some other persons if this activity is performed solely for the economic activities. The important is that the entrepreneurial does not have a status of legal entity, but it is rather unlimitedly liable for all obligations with his own also personal assets. The next form would be partnership, which is a company founded by 2 or more partners, which carry out activity under a common name. Partners are also unlimitedly and severally liable with their personal assets for the company obligations, and they may agree on the government structure of the partnership. The partnership is founded with the agreement of partners, and they are more flexible with arranging and determining their own relations. For example, partners may agree on 3 forms of performing and representing the company. They may agree that all partners may represent the company, that all partners may represent but only jointly, or they may agree that one of the partner is as leading partner and may represent the partnership in total. Then we have a limited partnership, which is a specific type of doing business where partners are divided as general partners and limited partners. General partners are the ones representing the company, and they are unlimitedly liable for all obligations, while the limited partners are often seen as passive investors, and they are only in practice giving the capital and are investing, and they are not liable for a company's obligations, nor they may have the right to represent the company unless the general partners authorize them. Regarding the branch of the foreign company, this is often first choice of the investors that has already established the foreign companies. The important is to highlight that the branch is not a separate legal entity, and it is actually an extension of a parent company. This would mean that the branch office does not contain separate assets, but can lien to the assets of parent company, and the parent company would be liable for all obligations. This would be a good choice for investors as it has some positive aspects. That would mean that the branch office can operate with only authorized representative who does not need to be employed in the company, while in the other forms, the director, for example, of limited liability company or joint stock company, must be employed in the company, and in case it is a foreigner, he or she needs to hold a work and residence permit in Montenegro. This is of importance, but it is also important to highlight that even though the foreigner holds a work and residence permit, there may be some positive aspects in regard that in case the director is also the majority owner of the company, he or she does not need to actually reside in Montenegro, and that would not affect the validity of the permit. Furthermore, I would now go to the aspects of limited liability company and joint stock company. In general, limited liability company is the most often established type of company for foreign investors. This choice is made by investors for reasons that limited liability company provides for flexibility, provides for lower costs, and provides for simple governance. As in the limited liability company, the shareholders may decide to have only decide only to have a director, which is a single person, or can raise the governance of the company through the board of directors. On the other hand, the joint stock company is more formal type of performing business, but it is better for financing, especially in the case the investors would like to raise their capital through the stake market, actually. So when it comes to the limited liability company, the founding capital would be would be divided into shares, and one owner may hold only one shares. However, if there are few owners, they may agree on a different nominal value of the capital. In the joint stock company, one stakeholder may have different types of stakes, which may give him different financing or different voting rights in the company. One main advantage of the limited liability company is the founding capital, which is only symbolical €1, while in the joint stock company, the minimum founding capital is 25,000, while for some specific types of performing business, for example, for investment companies, for monetary companies, that is bank, the minimum capital, the requirement for minimal capital may be even higher. When it comes to the number of members in limited liability company, as it is a smaller form of doing business, the maximum number would be 30 of the members and shareholders, while in the joint stock company there is no strict limit on the number of the shareholders. I will already explain the government structure for the limited liability company, while in the joint stock company it is usually a two-tier system, as it requires more controlling over the governments, and the investors usually decide on the two-tier system, which would require having a management board and a supervisory board, which is elected and which is elected by the same founders. Furthermore, it is important to point that the LLC would be useful, for example, for investments that would require joint ventures and the project companies, and is ideal for investors in the real estate in infrastructure projects. However, noting that also if the mandatory law provides for licensing or for the approvals that shall be obtained prior or after the founding, and this is the reason why the investors usually choose the limited liability company instead of branch office, since some permits may be granted only to limited liability companies and not to the branch office. On the other hand, the joint stock company allows easier transfer of ownership and is usually chosen by investors in banking and financing system, as it is more regulated and gives more control. In any case, in both limited liability company and joint stock company, when the company is founded, founders, that is stakeholders and shareholders, are more or less free to regulate their relations in the articles of association in respect to the some mandatory provisions or regulations. For example, in the public joint stock company, the restrictions related to the transfer of shares cannot be implemented in the articles of association, while in the private joint stock companies, the founders may agree on obligatory preemption right for the existing members, that is shareholders of the joint stock company. That would be the main aspects and the main force for performing business. As Lana introduced, we will also explain some general tax regime and tax benefits in Montenegro. In this slide, we have indicated only let's say most important aspects, and the first one would be the most important corporate income tax rates, which are progressive in Montenegro, covering from 9, 12, and 15 rate, depending on the income tax. Depending on the tax base for the tax rating. As Lana mentioned, the employment obligations that are established on the employer's side are not so restrictive and are very flexible. the one would be the minimal net salary, which is 600, and the 600 minimal salary is established for the work positions with high school education, and 800 with the working position on the university education. The general VAT registration is required exceeding 30,000, and the general VAT rate is 21. We have also lower general VAT rate, which is applied for some aspects or some services, for example, in food or tourism, and which can go with, in the rate of 7% or with the rate of 15%. One aspect that may be interesting to foreign investors and that can be beneficial for newly established companies is the possibility of some tax benefits established by regulation for newly established companies. These tax benefits refers for the company established in undeveloped municipalities in Montenegro. For example, one of the undeveloped municipalities, as Montenegro is a small country, would be only 1 hour driving far from the main capital, which is Podgorica. So this would be very beneficial for investors to consider. They may establish, for example, company in undeveloped municipality and to have their operational seat or other branches of that company in some other cities or in the capital. And these tax benefits provides for 100% reduction of corporate profit tax for the first 8 years of performing business, with the exemption provided by the regulation. Finally, here, as Anna already told, that we will provide you with this presentation, so you may have the possibility to closer review this tax review we prepared in this table, as this table provides a clear overview of the tax system in Montenegro from the perspective of investors, and some key taxes which shall be reviewed before also deciding on performing business in Montenegro, as it may also implicate the decision to establish the operation in Montenegro. As I already explained, the corporate income tax is progressive. The important would be I apologize. The withholding tax, which would be interesting for the border payment, and it goes for 15%. We have value-added taxes, as I explained. 21% is a standard rate, and we have reduced rates of 7% and 15% in some specific sectors, and there may be some VAT exemptions depending on the activity which is performed, or some type of business, or the, for example, some exporting situations. However, we will be also happy to discuss on this further in the Q&A part of the presentation. Thank you.
Anna, I'm handing over to you now.
Yes, thank you very much for this very important and interesting presentation. I think we all received a good overview, and now we know also how to, or who to contact if we have further questions. But I would suggest to use this chance now to ask your questions directly to our experts. So feel free to turn on your microphone and the camera if you want to, and ask your questions directly. In the meantime, we received a question, or like a couple of questions in advance, which I would like to ask to both of you. So the first one would be like, can foreign investors freely acquire real estate in Montenegro, and are there any limitations?
Generally, yes, the foreign individuals have the same rights as the Montenegrin nationals when it comes to owning the apartments, houses with a certain land yard associated with a house. But when it comes to the certain development areas, it is not possible to own it directly by a foreign individual, but this is very often overcome through the process of setting up a company, which is then has a completely national treatment and has no limitations when it comes to owning the real estate.
Okay, thank you very much. Then the second question we received is, do companies need to have a local presence or established entity in Montenegro in order to participate in the public tenders of Montenegro?
Well, this depends normally on the tender requirements. We often get this question asked, but when it comes to the infrastructure tenders, or public tenders in general, most of those tenders are requiring some of the prior experience or expertise based on which the companies get ranked. And usually, in most cases, it's a requirement to set up a company post-tender part, which means that if the company wins the tender, then this company can decide to set up either a branch or most commonly LLC for this type of project, depending whether the license is required and whether the law provides the possibility for a recognition of the foreign license, or the Montenegrin license needs to be issued to a legal entity, normally a limited liability company in Montenegro.
And speaking of the tenders, I have a follow-up question. Are those tenders only published on the Montenegrin platform for tenders, or as Montenegro is also a EU candidate country, are tenders for Montenegro also published on the EU website? Do you know that by any chance?
Thank you for this question. Normally, most commonly, Montenegro has the tender database website, which all the entities publishing the tenders are required to publish the tender in this database. If the tender is international character, so if we are looking for experience coming from mostly foreign investors, and we are speaking in the infrastructure projects for which the Montenegro didn't have the prior expertise, such as highways, some of the tunnel constructions, sometimes the road projects as well. Very often the entity who is running the tender decides to publish an international type of tender. So the publishing gets into sometimes the financial magazines outside the country, and is in parallel published on the website of this public company. Very often, those projects are linked to the financing of the international banks, such as EBRD, World Bank, or KfW, and sometimes those publishing is promoted and run through the procurement website of those financing institutions as well. So it depends usually on the value of the tender and on the type of tender, but it's always open for all the companies, regardless of whether they're from Montenegro or abroad.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I see that in the meantime, we received a question in the chat. So Almir Strujic is from the IT and digital sector, and he would like to know what the process is for intending to open a branch there. What is the procedure?
Diana, I can hand you over this one.
Yes. Well, the procedure is for opening a branch office is straightforward. The list of required documents is simple. It usually requires, is leaning for the founding documentation of a parent company. So the requirement would be to provide the central registry with the articles of association and financial documents of the parent company, followed by the decision on establishing the branch office in Montenegro, and with the decision on registering the authorized person for representing the branch office in Montenegro. Montenegro. From 1st January 2026, the Montenegrin Central Registry introduced the electronic system for establishing companies. It is not quite yet fully operational, and the system has one obstacle for foreign investors at this point, as the documents needs to be signed electronically. For now, the only electronic signatures that may be validly used are the ones issued by the Montenegrin authorities. So, for example, if the proxy is Montenegrin citizens, she may use its own electronic signature for the establishment. In case it is a foreigner, we have this obstacle at this point, but the system would be working with the domestic citizens and domestic proxies for the application and electronic establishment.
Thank you so very much. I think next would be Gerald Eder. I think he was the first one raising his hand. So please turn on your microphone and just go ahead. Yes.
Hello, Gerald Eder. I'm one of the managing directors of Hydrofil. We have established a company called Hydrofil DOO in Montenegro. And with this company, we apply for local tenders. What we have seen recently several times that a local authority not requires a local presence, a local company tendering, but they require in addition us to open a branch office, which is very strange for us. Is there an observation from your side why this happens? Is this exactly legally allowed that any authority in Montenegro decides on its own rules, even going against the requirement of opening a company, but suddenly requiring a branch office in Montenegro? Do you have an opinion, a legal opinion on that?
Well, from experience, I would tell you that my assumption, what this is about, is that it's not that the public company is asking to set up a branch or to have a limited liability company. It's simply that those tenders very often have some criterias based on which the companies who are participating in the tenders are ranked and required. And my assumption is that your LLC here locally doesn't have any of those experience. LLC is a separate legal entity and a branch is an extension of a foreign company. So unless you are participating in a JV between the local company and a foreign company so that the experience of the foreign company can get ranked and categorized on the tender process, which would make some sense if those particular tender requirements are allowing. Otherwise, it's a completely logical for me that if the foreign company is participating, they would have to have, in order to have, because their branch would not have a separate legal entity, so they can perform the work through the branch office and keep the requirements they had once they participated in the tender. Otherwise, your LLC in Montenegro would be considered as a subcontractor, because it's a separate legal entity. At that moment, has no prior experience, no references, and it cannot rely on the references of another legal entity, regardless of this legal entity being a parent company. So once you consider participating in a tender, you should either try to use a joint venture between the local entity, if you already have an LLC in Montenegro, and a foreign company, or use the structure just through a foreign company and then operate entirely through the branch. But it's a question of the structuring, but I assume that the requirement the public company is having is related mostly to experience, because they cannot link those experience with a particular LLC relatively newly established.
I understand that, and certainly we go with a joint venture with our own company in Montenegro. In addition, they require us to open a separate branch office, which is very strange for us.
if the tender requirements are allowing for the joint venture, and if in this joint venture the foreign entity which holds the requirements and experience is participating, I see no possibility for the employer to ask for this foreign entity to set up a branch itself.
But they do, because they say we are, and that's the key, we are free to set the requirements in our tenders. Nobody in Montenegro defines that. We are free to define that. And we define that any foreign company has to open a branch office, which I think leads to a very confusing situation for foreigners working in Montenegro, that different authorities have different legal opinions in Montenegro, and maybe somebody should observe these tendencies in future.
Well, I didn't understand at the first place that the tender requirements were the one who were setting the obligation to set up a branch. I can tell you that historically, public authorities were facing this trouble because the foreign companies were setting up branches, were awarded the tenders, sorry, not branches, were setting up an LLC, were awarded the tender in the process based on their experiences. And then once this issue became disputable, depending on whether some other party were disputing it, so some other tender participants, or became after during the project phase disputable, those issues arose. And I see that more often the employers are requiring not an LLC but more of a branch presence, because that this is one legal entity extended to the operations in Montenegro. So I guess that it's a change of the practice, at least in my experience from the project I'm seeing.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you. I think next was Andreas Ben-Padelek.
Yes, thank you very much. I represent Primus Council. It's a market entry company. We are a consortium of Austrian investors and companies which are interested in going to the EU accession markets. We are already in Moldova. I'm currently in Kyiv, and the next step is the trade mission in Montenegro, where I, in this context, have a few questions. Are you ready to answer this here, or should I follow up with an email?
But please pose a question, and if it's too much detail, we can also follow up through an email. Okay. But feel free, if it's a short question, then of course, yes.
Yeah, first, if there are enough participants already, if the mission is set and go, then second, if there are any agenda points you could share, maybe meetings with IFIs or financing institutions. And the last question is a little broader question. We talked about the infrastructure, energy, about wastewater treatment. Is waste to energy, waste to heat a topic? Is there a political discussion about it at the moment in Montenegro, or is it not a thing at the moment? Thank you very much.
I will answer to your last questions, but you have to guide me through or be more specific on the two ones. At first, two. When it comes to the waste to energy, I can tell you that the public company in Podgorica, the largest one, Deponie, is considering an incineration plant. Generally, there has been a lot of positive feedbacks from the population about this idea, but it's in a very, very early stage. So I think that they are thinking now to do a feasibility study, which should show whether this should be done through the public-private partnership or whether this is something they should develop. But yes, there is an idea to have an incineration plant in Podgorica.
The first question, if I may take over, was rather directed at us at Advantage Austria, I would say, at the Austrian Trade Commission, and maybe Biljana wants to share some information, but we will have a trade mission on the topics of infrastructure and and traffic in June, and I think the question was whether it will take place. Well, that depends on the number of participants, and we, as of now, don't have the minimum number yet, but there is still time until the beginning of May, and we are very positive that it will take place. It is a very important topic as well, and yeah, I introduced you before to my colleague Biljana. She will be happy to provide you more information later on. I think, or I would suggest to go on with the questions because we have quite many left. I think next was Barbara Konset. The question in the chat was, what are the tax benefits of establishing the company outside of the capital, Podgorica?
We will share the presentation, but just to briefly mention, the first idea when this regime, the tax benefit regime, was set, it was to reduce the social contributions and the taxes on the salaries, and to provide the benefits in relation to the tax income, release for 8 years of the no tax income up to the amount of 200,000 euros. But nowadays, with the new project of the government, Europe Now 1 and Europe Now 2, the contributions on the salaries have been heavily decreased, making them relatively minimal in the entire Montenegro. So what stands out still as a benefit is no capital gain tax for the first 8 years if it's the company is operating in undeveloped cities in Montenegro. And then I can fill in here if I missed something.
Everything was in place. So nothing to add.
We can go to the next one then.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, the next one is, in order to register a company in Montenegro from Austria, is it necessary to have a notary service in Montenegro, or can it be done personally?
In general, the notary services would be needed. This is since the Montenegro is introducing the new electronic system, and some notary services must be taken in consideration. For example, the notarization of decision on establishment or the consent to be appointed as CEO would require notarial services in a manner that the notary confirms that the person signed the document and to convert it into electronic document. However, since the system is not yet fully operational, this may be changed in a manner that for establishing companies, the notarial services would not be required. However, the use of the electronic signature would be required, and the electronic signatures would be the ones from the notary or for the ones that has the Montenegrin citizens with their personal ID. In general, the use of the notary would be considered in this regard to confirm the assignment of a person and to convert it into electronic document. However, in case the company or the founder has a proxy in Montenegro, the proxy that is the attorney may conduce these actions on behalf of that person in front of the notary in Montenegro.
Thank you very much. I think next is Sasha Vracar. Please just ask your question.
Yes, hello everybody, dear ladies and gentlemen. I have several questions, but I focus on two because we are a lot of people. I wanted to ask you if there are specific provisions, contracts between Serbia and Montenegro, which would benefit if the founder in Montenegro would be a Serbian company, or it makes no difference if the founder is the Austrian owner of the Serbian company anyway. And connected also to the working permits for the people. And the second question regarding data protection, because Montenegro is also still not in the EU, but I don't know if it is considered a secure country for data transfer, whitelisted by the Commission. Maybe you know it. Thanks.
Thank you. If you are meaning about whether the physical person, whether it's there are benefits if it's a physical natural person who is the owner, a Serbian national or Austrian
company,
national?
a company.
Yeah. Then it's up. It's the contrary. I would more advise for you to set up a Montenegrin entity and then set up a branch in Serbia, than vice versa. Why I'm saying this? Because Serbia has its own currency. It's a very protective. So once you're doing a foreign investments, whether it's a capital contribution or shareholder loan, you have to report it to the National Bank of Serbia, and you have to get approval. When it comes to Montenegro, we don't have a currency to protect, so our transfer of money is completely free. So I would advise you to use the entity from Austria, because it will make your life easier not to go through the approval processes before the National Bank of Serbia.
Thanks. I didn't even consider that one. No.
That's something we very often see because normally Belgrade is considered to be still a hub for the region, and sometimes this is a problematic once you structure your corporate structure that way. There are implications not in Montenegro but in Serbia, which you may want to consider a different route then. And the other question was related to the data protection.
Yes.
We have this is not my area of expertise. We have a partner in a firm who dealing not exclusively but very heavily with the data protection laws. What I know is that we haven't been aligned still with the GDPR. This is in process. This is one of the very important laws which are left to be aligned in a very near future. There is a law on protection of the data protection law, but it's not completely aligned with the GDPR, to be completely frank and honest. What I know is I don't know whether Montenegro is on the list in Austria. Whether the Austrian authorities consider Montenegro as a safe country for exporting data. I know that Austria is, of course, the safe export country for Montenegrin data, because I work once you are looking at it from the Montenegrin perspective, you very rarely look what is considered in different institutional jurisdictions. But I believe that I hope that it is. But this is something we can follow up with you on later stage and inform.
Thank you.
Okay, perfect. I think we have one final question. The question is from Thomas Václavicek. What is the easiest way to obtain the necessary licenses for design and supervision under the new law of construction?
And this is something I would ask you to follow up on a later stage. What I know before is that mostly the licenses for the legal entities are dependent on the licenses of the physical entities. So you need to have the few engineers who are already licensed employed in order to get the license for the legal entity, because this has been quite heavily amended. There are a lot of things, new things under the new construction law. And I'm not sure whether the bylaws for the licensing are aligned completely, and this is something I can follow up to Thomas after this call.
Okay, thank you. If there are no further questions, you know now who to contact if some time later on you have them. And as I mentioned before, this webinar was recorded, so you will later on receive the link to the video and also the presentation of our experts. Thank you for your time. It was very insightful. Thank you for answering all these questions. And I wish all of you a great time and a lovely day. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Anna. Thank you, Biljana, and thank you to everyone who participated. We really enjoyed.